This is Grilled by the Staff Canteen, and I'm Cara Houchin, editor of the Staff Canteen. And in this episode, I talked to Paul Newbegin, founder of the Past podcast. He recently announced that this series would be his last after 3 years of interviewing some of the UK's best chefs.
So let's start at the beginning. Why did you want to do a podcast about chefs and hospitality of all the topics? Where did that interest and then the next step to kind of going into interviews come from?
Obviously I'm not a chef, I've never been in the industry, but I'm just a massive foodie, really interested in food, and I love Desert Island Discs, so I listen to Desert Island Discs religiously every week, whether I know the person or don't know the person. I just love the podcast, and Heston was on it, and I love Heston obviously, as I'm sure a lot of people that love food do, and I just thought there must be more of this, there's so many chefs out there must be more people talking about their restaurants. So I just started looking it up, and I couldn't really find a podcast that was like what exactly I wanted. And so I was just like, well, what do they say? If it's, what is it? You got to build it, right? If it's not there, then you've got to build it, or you've got to make it happen, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So that's what it was. That's all it was. It was just a stupid idea of, I want to listen to more of this, and it's not there, so let's make it so I can listen to it.
So you probably never expected it to grow into what it's actually going to. So how many followers or subscribers do you have to?
Yeah, I mean, like, and this is obviously no disrespect, when I first started it, I was just kind of approaching like local street food people and really interesting and cool people, but then I quickly realised that my passion is in the Michelin, the high end and what have you. And like you say, just snowballed to the point of being like number 2 at one point in the food charts. We'll get, thousands of listeners in a week. At one point, before iTunes changed how the subscribers worked, we had like 40,000 subscribers. And now a lot of people talk about downloads, that you don't really see subscribers as much. But I was expecting like 4, or 4,000, not that many. Do you know what I mean? It was. We did one with like Nick Kokonas, and that had something like 6,000 downloads in the US, and I'm like, well, I'm in Leeds. At that time in my bedroom in Leeds interviewing. I was in my bedroom interviewing Nick Kokonas via Skype and thinking, this is a bit weird. But I think it's the power of just asking. That's what I've always said, is there wouldn't be anybody that I wouldn't ask. Because the worst they're going to say is no.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, having started a food-related podcast because you couldn't find what you were after, how has podcasts related to food changed in the time since you started? Because it seems like there's a lot more, there seems to be maybe a lot more need for it, people want it more.
Yeah.
So,
I don't, for me, I think that's brilliant. And I think what frustrated me, and by the way, it's a great podcast, but what frustrated me is that the number 1 food podcast is, and was, and all I'm sure always will be, was Jessie Ware, who it is related to food, but it's more like about music. And I was like, this feels like a real shame that actually it's supposed to be about food, and number 1 isn't chefs, it should be chefs. And not that I ever have or will be number 1, but there, you look at someone like what Paul Foster's doing, and he will, I'm sure, at one point get to that number 1 spot, because that's what people want. People want to hear about these fascinating people that we were just talking about it, before obviously recording, but dedicate their lives to something. And I always say it's about, you made it happen. Like I'd say to Josh at Le Cochon a lot, before you were there, that street that Le Cochon is on, I walked up and down it practically every few months, because I used to go up to York a lot, and it was where I used to stay. It was on the walk into town, and there wasn't anything there. There was like a pub and what have you. He comes along, you walk down there now, there's bars, there's restaurants, there's bubble tea rooms, he's got a wine bar there. He practically built that, and that's so cool, and I think people want to hear that story, because it's interesting.
Yeah. You clearly have like a real passion for what they do.
I could bore anybody. I'm sure I could take the most engaged person in the world about food and drink, and by the end I would be boring them. So just shut me up because I will bore you by the
So you started this interview by saying that you listened to a podcast to Heston. So have you interviewed Heston?
I've got Ashley Palmer Watts. That's the closest I've got. He definitely would probably be one of my dream guests. I set this out and I said if I could interview Marcus Waring, Jason Atherton or Heston, any of those three, I would down tools and say that I'd won. We did a GQ food and drink special and I got Marcus and Jason in one night. So that's fine.
Yeah.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
So Heston's still there.
Yeah. If he calls me after this Stuff Canteen goes out, I won't say no. I will come out of retirement and then straight back into retirement. Yeah.
So we'll talk a bit more about the chefs and some of your possibly more interesting interviews that you've had. But obviously I wanted to talk to you about the podcast and why it's, as you said, kind of naturally is coming to an end, because it seems a real shame, and why is that going to happen, and will it come back? Is this the end of it, or is it just going on hold a little bit?
It's exactly what we were talking about at the beginning, and I think a lot of chefs I speak to say the same thing. It's the minute where you have to do your passion as a job, it becomes really, really interesting because you have to look at it differently. So now I'm at the stage where potentially I wouldn't be able to interview a chef that I would want to, because they might not have an affiliation with a product, or they might not use a certain brand or whatever, because that brand would potentially be giving me money, and that's not where I want it to be. So if it's going to be like that, then I cannot do it as a business. I think I would be lying if I said I would never ever pick it up again, because a podcast, it's a passion for me, it's a hobby. But having said that, I've achieved everything that I want to do and more. So to make me come back, it's going to have to be a big, a Heston effect, or Gordon Ramsay rings you up. You're not going to go, no, are you? The most retired person in history.
Very excited when we got to Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah, and I think you would know, you would drop everything, right, for a chef like that, because they're the ones that are just synonymous with the game and with what you're interested in. But I'm happy with what I've done. If I never put out a podcast ever again, I can honestly say I've achieved what I wanted to do. I've got a special episode which I've not released the name of the chef for the last one, and he's someone who doesn't give a lot of interviews, and he actually said to me, the only reason I said yes is because it was you approaching, not anybody else. Now that was that was cool. So
that's
I was
nice. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued now.
When you turn off,
we're not going to get an exclusive.
I never did it. This year I released every single guest. I don't normally do it. I like to keep it a surprise. And we've got some amazing guests coming up this year. And by the way, we've got enough content to last until October, so I'm not going away just yet.
Yeah.
But when we put that last one out, I'll be really proud, because he doesn't, even I bet probably for well more established people like yourselves, if I mention it to you, you probably say, oh, that is quite a good one, because we've tried to do something with him in the future, and he said no. He's very picky about what he does. So...
Oh, you've got me there.
Yeah.
That'll teach me to press record without grilling you first.
Sorry.
So, obviously you have got up until October, and you've interviewed so many chefs. Have you got any particular favourites that you've done? Is there any way you've been quite shocked or surprised by maybe their answers to your questions? Is there any that really stand out?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, because I thought I wanted to share a few kind of happy memories. I think the first boring answer is James Mackenzie, because from a technical side, that's when I got my new equipment. Okay. So if you listen to the first kind of...
We're not saying that James is boring. No.
What? No.
Just to clarify.
James is fantastic. It's a brilliant episode. What I'm saying is the reason is boring. Sorry,
right,
okay. You were a fan. He was a brilliant guest. So from a technical side, I'd choose that was my one highlight, because I was able to step up then in terms of what I wanted to do, and he was a brilliant guest to do that. Paul Ainsworth changed the game for me in terms of then I think he really understood the concepts that I was trying to get at, and he picked dishes from like life moments, like that Desert Island Discs, you know, like when they choose a record from a wedding or whatever. He did that, and he was brilliant at that. And then after that, a lot of guests then said, oh, I listened to Paul's episode, and then they kind of followed it.
Yeah.
So he was the one, I think, that kind of changed the game, that really understood the concept. And yeah, obviously I've mentioned Nick Kokonas already. That one blew my mind, because I just thought, we don't exist in any similar circles, you know. It's not like I know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that knows Nick Kokonas. I just approached him and he said yes, and he is, you know, Tok is an innovative reservation system, and Alinea, which he's a part of, is an innovative restaurant. So that was cool. Yeah, they would be 3 highlights.
Yeah. Did you learn anything that, like I said, that you didn't know from some of these chefs? Because I know they give interviews, but you know, sometimes you can take a little bit extra from them if they relax. So,
well, if I go back to that Alinea example with Tok and Nick, that is a theme that's run a lot, because I like the chefs to lead the conversation. I don't really lead the conversation, and we were talking about just the effect on a no-show, you know, on somebody not turning up to your restaurant. And that was the first question I asked Nick. I said, you know, forget late cancellations, forget whatever, where you might have an opportunity to ring someone on a waiting list. What is the impact if I book and I just don't turn up? And he, yeah, obviously I'm not going to go into his full answer because it's a long-winded answer, but I learned something really, really interesting there. And anybody that asks me where to start, if they're, you know, not necessarily known my podcast before, I do say Nick Kokonas as one of the episodes, and Paul Ainsworth, because, like I say, he just really got it. But yeah, when he, you know, what he said, and I was like, well, yeah, I never thought of that as a diner, you know. And some of us are conscientious, but some that just physically do not turn up. It was really, yeah, I learned a lot from him.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
no shows
cool.
is obviously a massive topic for chefs. So yeah, I can imagine that people were really interested in that. So
also, just the big thing, and as the latest episode that's just gone out, Paul Leonard, a lot of chefs talk about how important it is to retain staff, and not just attract staff, which I think is a big problem in the industry, but I think the one thing that maybe doesn't get as much light is that retention. So you've attracted them, but how can you keep them there? Because I said to him something like, you know, I can see your dish and I can identify that it's yours. I can, you know, visually, and you've got this like really strong identity which he's building at the Burlington. And he said that would not be possible without that staff member who plates and plates and plates every day and knows the way that we're going and knows how my thought process and our, you know, collective thought process. I have to retain a staff member for him to build that knowledge, or her to build that knowledge. And that was really, I'd never thought about it like that before. I just kind of assumed, you know, you turn up, you go, this is how you plate a dish, and that's it. But it's way, way, way more than that.
Yeah, which I think probably a lot of diners don't appreciate either, do they? So,
no, and I certainly didn't before that sort of topic started coming up, like how, and again, especially in markets like London, where in one street you can have 3 or 4 Michelin star restaurants, plus then other high-end restaurants, you know. There's a lot of competition as well in markets like London and now York and places like that, you know. So it's a big. I think it's something that will become more talked about, as well as this attraction. Is how can we then retain our colleagues and our brigades.
Yeah, no, definitely. And obviously you do the podcast, but you are a diner as well. You do like to eat out. So do you have any, like, what are your top 3 restaurants that you've eaten in, do you think? I'm sure that changes year on year. It does for me. Yeah. So
yeah.
This year.
This year. Do you know what? Because I'm getting married in August, we haven't really done loads of dining this year, because obviously we're all saving up. We're going to Gagan on our honeymoon, so that's going to be actually one of the newest ones I just mentioned before we went on that we're literally going to go to like now is the White Swan at Fence. I'm really looking forward to that. Best restaurant ever is Geranium, Copenhagen. Best UK restaurant for me is Raby Hunt. If you ask my partner, it's Longplume. So I'm looking forward to maybe one that would unite us both in the UK, but they're high standards there.
Yeah.
And it's what's also interesting is a guy messaged me. He listens to the podcast. I didn't know him before, and he's sort of become somebody I know. And he went to a few restaurants that I'd interviewed on the podcast, and the one that I thought he would love the most, he actually liked the least. And then it's not really fair to name him or them, but it's so subjective that even though he's a fan and he was so keen of all three where he booked, it's interesting how a different diner can respond differently. And I'm sure you get it as well. I'm also aware slightly now that perhaps when people start to get to know you and know that you're in the industry, I think the golden rule, which I've learned, is you look after the industry, right? And I don't consider myself a part of the industry, but I'm blessed that some people do consider me a part of the industry, which is mad. So you kind of get that little bit extra. So maybe I've had an experience that somebody else wouldn't necessarily get.
And everyone has an off day. You can't be perfect all the time.
It's a human industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, that's something I've learned is going into it. You just assume that these people are just machines, and they've worked in, even again, we've used Le Cochon a lot, but to achieve something like that, you'd assume he'd worked in the top restaurants and had been finely tuned into this chef he is. But actually, he was a young guy really when he started somewhere like Le Cochon, and to produce the level of food that he does is, it should be plauditative, but at the same time, like say, I'm sure Josh won't mind me saying at one point he would have done a duff dish, but because he's human.
Yeah. And then obviously we talked about podcasts, and Paul Foster his podcast has started. And why do you think that's so popular? Because it seems to have done really well very quickly.
It's brilliant.
What is it that appeals about his out of however many podcasts there are floating around out there about food?
I've been approaching Paul since pretty much series 1 to appear on the show. So when he announced that he was going to do his own, I then didn't feel like he just didn't want to be on my show, or perhaps he's just doing his own thing. Podcast is a really different game to something like YouTube. In that YouTube, you didn't have to be famous first. The people that tend to get the big numbers on podcasts are ones that have an existing audience.
Yeah.
And it's something that obviously I've encountered, but I've just been blessed maybe with the guests, because again, the level of my guest is so high. That's not to say he's not a brilliant podcaster. I'm sure he is. Do you know what? I haven't actually listened to a single episode of Paul's show.
No.
And the reasons are twofold. Number one, I don't want it to influence whatever I've got left.
Yeah.
And number two, again, I've got a 3-week honeymoon in Thailand coming up with 2 long haul flights, so I've subscribed and saved them all for my flight.
Oh really?
Yeah. So
that is very forward thinking.
Well, look, but again, because when I stopped doing it, that if someone like Paul hadn't come along, I wouldn't have had what I wanted. So this will be brilliant now, because I don't then have to listen to my own voice.
Yeah.
I can listen to other people's voice.
And I imagine his angle is probably very different to yours. As an actual chef, he's coming at it with a completely different perspective. So I think because you're so into food, and it is, like you said, it was your hobby and your passion anyway, I think obviously you will find it very interesting, probably different for different reasons to other people. So
I always said I didn't want the show to be about me. It doesn't matter who I am for what I wanted to do. It was all about the guest. Whereas what I like from what I have seen of Paul's is you get kind of their joint stories, and you know, because he'll have relationships with the guests that he's booking on, so there'll be that bit more, do you remember this time when we were working in this place? And when the host has lived the industry as much as the guest has, that it can only be good. So I have absolutely no qualms about recommending his podcast or looking forward to listening to it. It's not a problem at all.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this time of year, been doing this job for 5 years, I like to think this is like the lull period, like the quiet before the storm. So should we talk a little bit about the awards season, which is obviously coming up with all the guides and things. And you've obviously been to a lot of these, interviewed chefs whilst you've been there. What's your thoughts on the industry awards and accolades, stars, rosettes?
Yeah, we were just talking, weren't we, before you were recording. When I started, and this is the biggest probably difference in me as a diner, I almost wouldn't consider a place if it didn't have a star. Like I would be like, if it's a birthday, special occasion, anniversary, whatever, I will go to a Michelin star restaurant. I've realised a lot more now that a star is an amazing achievement, but it's like one collective people's opinions. And you look at, got Manor. I did a Manor special, the guys over in Manchester, and we were talking about obviously Manchester famously never having a star, but they've got 3-4 incredible restaurants there with Tast, Adam Reed, Manor that I've just mentioned. It will happen at some point, but just because it hasn't happened now doesn't mean that those restaurants aren't great. I obsess over things like the World 50 Best list. I obsess over things like the National Restaurant Awards. And for I do a full-time job, I book time off normally so I can stream them live, or, last year, thanks to you actually, got an invite down to the Michelin thing. I couldn't make it, but hopefully I'll be able to go this year. It's something to achieve, it's something to obsess about, yes, but I think chefs are starting to realise now if you focus too much attention into getting a star, you might end up with unhappy guests. And 99.9% of everybody I've interviewed, I'm sure, in fact, let's face it, 100% would rather a full restaurant than a star. If I gave a chef the option, busy, star, they'd go busy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course they would. But it's just, it is interesting, and we did discuss it earlier about people's opinions, and
sure,
it's very subjective. So
100%.
Just because you've got a star and someone else hasn't got a star doesn't mean that the food isn't.
And they're all different. You go. A place that I'd really like to go, and I can never get a table, is the Crown at Birchett's, because I'm from that part of the world. And it's super classical, and I would love to go, because I've only ever been to one classical Michelin star restaurant before, which was Gaultier's, when that had a Michelin star in Soho. Everything else I've done tends to be that more creative side, your long plumes and stuff, where obviously there's classical techniques, but they've elevated it, or they've kind of whatever. I'd love to go somewhere like the Crown, because to see almost that history and to see how he's interpreted that, and that's what I love about Michelin, is that 1 star in Oldstead in York, for example, is doing a completely different thing to one up the road in, you look at the York Arms, very classical. When the Box Tree had a star, very classical. Yeah, you get Man Behind the Curtain comes into Leeds. He's like the opposite of classical, right? Yeah. So that's what I love about it.
Yeah, and we also said about who you would like to see get a star this year. So are you going to tell us who you would like to see get a star?
Do you want me to tell? Do you want me to go on? Well, I love
Michelin star predictions. They're so much fun.
Okay, well, I normally have 3. I haven't. In fact, no, I can settle down on my third one. I would love, and I really think it could happen, to see Skosh in York get a star. I think a lot of people are talking about it. Again, if you look at someone like Salt, Paul Foster, when he just got it, the things they almost remind me of each other. That kind of really casual, but the focus is on the food. A second one is Cornerstone. I'm sure you'll have absolutely no vested interest in me saying that at all. I'm sure you would love. You don't care whether that happens or not, right?
No.
And the third one is Akhtar Islam Ofim in Birmingham, because I think he's really, really pushing on, and he, barring my special guest, is the he's the penultimate episode this year. Okay. And I went down there and spent some time with Akhtar, and I think Ofim could do it this year. I think I've heard lots of good things coming out of Birmingham from him. So he's an incredible chef. Yeah. So there's my 3.
Cool. Well, we will find out in a few months.
I know it's not.
Any new 3 stars Any new 2 stars?
Do you know what? 3 stars I tend to ignore because in this country it almost seems impossible to get 3 stars. Like, you look at Longclume and think, what do they have to do to get 3 stars? Sat Baines, what do they have to... You know, we went to Sat Baines Christmas time and the food was absolutely out of this world. Like, every single course was just full of everything that you'd want Sat Baines' food to be full of. And yet then you look at other restaurants abroad that get it. So I don't really look at 3. 2 is a really good question. You'd have to come back to me on that one. Again, I tend to look at the ones, actually, because that's what excites me in this country, is the ones that, again, places like Cochon, I could easily have them on that list of long overdue for a star. I don't mean to keep going back to them, but, you know, there tends to be this little thing, I think, when you not got a star to getting a star, that's almost like a bigger achievement in a way, because it's what you said, it's that boom, you come on and you've made it, if you like, on the global stage. That to me is more exciting. That's kind of probably where I focus a little bit more at that level.
Well, we shall see if you're
it's
right.
It's a long bet, isn't it? We've got until October. Sorry, this is boring. I made the world's most long-term bet this year that the next 2, so this is going into 2021, world's 50 best restaurants will be in Copenhagen. So if that's not the world's longest running bet, I'd love somebody somewhere tell me if you've got a bet that goes longer than 2021, and I'll congratulate you.
So back to you and your podcast and your lineup for the last series that you're going to do for now. How did you decide which chefs to have on that? Did you have a list in mind, or did you just kind of throw it out there and see who came back? How did it work?
It's just natural, really. I wanted to, when we did a special at Hyde last year, and I think it was like 2 hours long, so thank you to anybody that listened to all of that in one go, where we did like kind of everybody. So it was like, you know, obviously Hyde above, Hyde below, wine, front of house. I wanted to do a special, and I had Manor in mind because I knew that they're a little bit like that. They've got that kind of multifaceted thing at Manor. Apart from that, it's just natural, and I'll just kind of look at who's interesting, and me and you spoke about it when I interviewed you, actually, trying to get the balance right in terms of gender as well, so it's like a really fair representation. And whilst it's something that me and you said that you don't want to be conscious of it, and you just want to see it as chefs. Because of how my connections were when I started it, and it's no other reason, my connections when I started it were mainly male chefs. So then I was quite conscious quite quickly that I have to make new connections into female chefs, because otherwise I'd only kind of be getting one side of it. So we've got Roberta Hall will be 2 or 3 episodes time. And she just is doing incredible things at the Little Chart Room, and within something like 6 months was reviewed by Grace Dent and Marina Lachlan, and now is in the best national restaurant lists. And so to get her now, and then in however many years time when she is one of, you know, probably in the top 50 at least, where she deserves to be, that's a real coup for me.
Yeah, she's one to watch, definitely
100%.
One to watch.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I've not had a chance to go and eat there, but it's definitely on the list.
I had the best cheesecake there.
Did you?
blood orange cheesecake, and I still think about it now, and this was 6 months ago at least that I ate there, and it was probably we went up to Edinburgh, did a gastro trip, and it was probably the dish of the trip was her blood orange cheesecake. So yeah, there you go. There's my compliment. If she finds this, I'll text her afterwards and say, I've just shouted you out, your cheesecake.
Yeah, so you didn't have a plan necessarily of your last lineup. You just.
I am conscious. I'm sure I've said it a few times, but if it is going to be the last one, who the last one was. I was really conscious about that, because I thought even though I'm proud of every episode, really, really proud, I wanted it to be one where, like you say, if how can I say this in the right way? I wanted it to be someone where, if I never left it again, I say, well, at least that's how it ended. You know, at least that was the one that again, special guest teaser, doesn't do loads of stuff and, you know, isn't just somebody who is in the promotion tour promoting a book or a new restaurant or whatever. The guest had nothing to promote at all. He was just there because he wanted to do it, and that's how I wanted it to end. So that was the only thing I was conscious about.
Yeah. So how do you feel about it possibly being the end?
It's no problem to me. I've made my peace with it. You know, there's other ideas that I'd like to do and explore, and some of those things are in food and some aren't. I've done way more than I ever wanted. That's cool by me.
Yeah. How many years have you had it for?
By the time it ends, it'll be over 3 years.
That's still a very short time to have got the connections that you've got and do the interviews that you have.
What you get, and what I think everybody benefits from in the hospitality industry, is it's like a sect. It's like a cult, you know, and everybody knows everybody else, and everybody is really connected to everybody else. And so, for example, we've done 3 episodes now where Kirk Howarth, who I met through the podcast, actually booked the guests for me, because he just said, I loved being interviewed by you so much, I want to recommend Tom Shepherd. So he did Tom Shepherd. That was one of our biggest listened to ever episodes.
Yeah.
Akhtar Islam, and one more that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was somebody else that Kirk introduced me to. I'd have to think about that one, but yeah, at least 3 that he just booked. So I didn't do anything. I just turned up at the date that Kirk and Tom and whatever had agreed. It was great. Well, fine.
So having got into the minds of chefs and spent a lot of time with them, do you think it's something you could do? Could you be a chef?
I talk about this all the time. Like, there is definitely a reason why I eat out so much, and that reason is I'm not a good cook. I've done that the odd day. I did a day at Scosh actually. So you'd have to ask. I did a day at Norse as well before it sadly closed. So you'd have to ask people like that if I was any good. I'd love the thought of it, but at the same time, again, there's also that part of me which is the same reason why I'm ending the podcast, in that if you're going to do your passion as a job, you need to make sure that then it doesn't kind of burn out and it doesn't, you know, become too much. I interviewed a guy who makes chocolates in Leeds, and he said it's left brain, right brain, and I agree with that.
I think that's a nice...
Sorry, I've given you...
I think that's a nice place to end. So thank you very much for talking to me. And hopefully it's not the complete end of the pass. Hopefully we'll see it return.
I want to interview you. Do you want to be a guest? You've done it once. Do you want a full episode?
You've interviewed me once before. I'm not as interested as these crazy people that work in kitchens.
You could have 5 good dishes, actually. I'm sure the amount of places you've eaten. No, thank you for your time. And also, I just want to say on record, from the very beginning I approached the staff canteen, and you've done nothing but support me when you didn't even know who the hell I was. So that's been a real blessing. And to do the past podcast has been a privilege of a lifetime. So thank you to you, and thank you to anybody who's listened or been a guest. Kiss.
We hope you enjoyed this interview, and if you have any comments, feel free to tweet us or comment on the post. We're making all of our interviews available to download. The next episode is with Ben Mark, chef owner of Newington Green's Perilla. He talks honestly about what he got wrong when he opened 2 years ago, and gives advice to chefs who are just starting out. And finally, if you like what we do, whether it's our podcast or our videos or even our features, please head over to our Patreon page and support us there.